Hey everybody, today I want to do a short little teaching segment on something that I ran across last week. It's based on a principle that I ran across. And this little phrase in an article that I came to see was that high capacity leaders build rhythm, not pressure. Now I want to take the high capacity and leadership part off because this applies to all of us, whether you're a leader or not. Building rhythms, not pressure in our life. So what does that look like? I reflected back on that and I was like, there's a lot of truth in that. There's a lot of truth in that vocationally, a lot of truth in that financially, relationally, spiritually, volunteer-wise, involvement in your church, on and on and on and on it goes. Here's what that means. You don't want to just build more pressure in your life. You want to build rhythms. So for example, there was a time in my life where I was under a lot of pressure in different ways. For example, when I first moved out, I still remember when I first moved out on my own, living on my own, renting a place and working full time. I was pretty discouraged. It didn't take long because I was working a full-time job and almost nothing was left over. Like I had gone to college, I worked through that debt free. I'd, been saving while I was living at home and doing all this stuff right? And yet I have like nothing left over after working a full-time job and paying my bills. And I was not living a lavish life. Didn't even have internet, didn't have, I had just like a antenna TV type thing. That was all I had. Didn't have a home phone, just had a cell phone, all those things. So I had already, if you will, cut down all the non-necessities, and this was what it was. And that was discouraging. And most of the time that I lived on my own and was single, most of the time I had two jobs just to be able to afford the cost of living. And I was not living a lavish lifestyle at all and trying to just tuck away a little bit of money, into retirement, like $100 a month or something. 167 at one point, like 2,000 a year, saving that much toward my retirement was my goal. So my point is, I was under pressure of where my bills were and where my finances were. And if I wanted to achieve my goals, I was building more pressure into my life, get an extra job, pressure to earn more money. And I wasn't building another rhythm. Now, don't misunderstand me. There's times in our life when we have to do that, but there are ways that I could have more strategically built some rhythm into my life. For example, I was working a job that did not have a good rhythm. I worked a lot of nights and then I worked early mornings, and sometimes they were back to back, the shifts that I had. So essentially you come home, you sleep for like 5 or 6 hours, you go back and work another shift. And so it was not one that was very healthy in terms of a rhythm to life. It was, a job to pay the bills in the short term, but it wasn't like a real healthy long-term pattern in terms of how that operated. So my point being is having the extremes of working a later shift, working an earlier shift, not sleeping very much, and then doing extra work on top of it, it created more pressure in my life rather than rhythms. Now let me fast forward to another one, or I guess rewind a little bit. When I was in seminary, I was going to school and I was in an intensive program. And so I did create some pressure because there was the reward, the seminary I went to, that for the same price as taking 3 master's level classes, I could take 5. And instead of having 16-week classes, they had 8-week intensive classes. So I could do 3 one half of the semester, 2 the other half. They'd overlap for just a few days. And I did that and worked in a job where I had to raise some support in the beginning of that. Then later on, I would take a job. But while I was doing all of that, I created a lot of pressure. I also was getting a lot of experience. I was teaching classes probably about 3 times a week, 3 weekly classes I was teaching in my church. I was teaching Sunday school. I was teaching a discipleship group. I was teaching, I forget what the other group was as well. I think it was like Wednesday night, Friday night, and Sunday morning. And then sometimes I would preach on top of that as well. So that's 4 times. Plus I'm doing this intensive school program. I'm not making hardly any money. And I'm just kind of picking up, some side work where I can fit it in. And that's what I was doing. It created a lot of pressure. So I was doing a lot of volunteer work related to what I was preparing and training for, and working in a position where I had to raise the funds to do work in the vein of what I was studying to do. But those all created pressure. Now I want to flip the narrative a little bit on rhythm. Applying more and more pressure to my life, it ultimately led, and it's a whole nother story, maybe I'll talk about sometime, it led to needing to go through a sabbatical process, needing to actually go through a counseling process to learn to rest, to rebuild rhythm. Because working 90-hour weeks, working without ever shutting your brain off, working essentially 7 days a week for years, catches up with you. We're not designed that way as human beings. I had to learn that it's actually okay to rest. I had to learn that, it's okay to actually say no to some things or to let some opportunities go. And you know what? You're actually more productive if you build rhythms into your life rather than intensity. Here's what I mean by that. For example, let's say you have a goal of wanting to get in shape or wanting to exercise more regularly. The best way to do that is to establish a rhythm of several things. Getting proper rest and sleep, eating more healthily, so your regular diet, and 3, going on a regular basis to exercise, whether that's taking walks, whether that's going to the gym if that's your thing, whether it's doing more manual labor outside or getting more fresh air. There's a lot of different ways to exercise. Personally, I've always veered more toward liking to have something that has additional benefits. I don't want to go to a gym. I'd rather go split some wood. I'd rather go do some work in the garden or yard work around the house and do it in a bit more manual way. I would rather, be taking a nice walk outside rather than walking on a treadmill. And treadmills always make my legs kind of shaky, but you don't need to know that anyway. It just kind of makes me feel like a jellyfish because it's not natural. But anyway, my point is, the healthiest way to long-term get the benefits of better movement and a more healthy lifestyle of exercise is to build a rhythm. Intensity of simply, I'm going to go to the gym every single day, or I'm going to work out 7 days a week. Actually, the science shows that you not only go down your effectiveness of the exercise, but it actually can be counterproductive if you're exercising so much without ever taking a rest in the week. You're actually more effective if you take at least 1 day off, if not a couple days off. In other words, intensity and immense pressure and depriving yourself of sleep to get up earlier and go take a run or whatever so that you can drop weight or feel better, it actually is one of the less effective ways long-term for your body. Now, it might have short-term benefits, but pressure only produces things in the short term. I want you to think about boiling water. You turn up that heat, the water begins to boil and bubble, right? And steam billows out. The intensity of that heat, it's going to burn up the water in a relatively brief period of time. If you don't add anything else to the dish as it's boiling over and the steam is billowing out, it may even roll over and spill over the sides of the pot. But if you were warming it on a much lower temperature, that steam can sustain for much longer. If you have it covered up and you have just a small puncture hole there, it's essentially like having a tiny dehumidifier at a lower temperature that sustains it for a longer period of time. My point is this: in our lives, how are we building rhythms? In your finances, are you focused on intensity? There is something about gazelle intensity of really dialing in, really getting serious about dialing in your budget quickly and lowering the expenses and selling off what you can and paying down debt quickly. All of those things have an intensity, but it's a brief intensity. None of us can live that intense forever. You're going to eventually expend yourself. Now, what happens is we might be really intense accomplishing something like paying down debt or getting to a place of having some emergency savings in our life or paying down our home or, whatever the goal is in our finances, getting on a budget and sticking to it and shopping deals. And we begin to develop these habits. But then what many times we completely miss is how are we actually building rhythms into our life? So, for example, I can have a rhythm in my life where I periodically check an insurance rate, like once or twice a year. Maybe I want to see what car insurance would run me through another vendor, through another broker. What would it be? Is it about what I'm paying now? That could become a habit. where it just becomes part of life rather than, oh, intensity, I need to make a change, I need to save money, I need to lower this insurance bill now. What about with your cell phone, or what about with your grocery shopping? What if periodically you just price check things between a couple of different stores and compare options? What if it becomes a habit? Like when you're going to be going to a different store for something, you look at a couple of other items you typically get, just take a couple minutes and compare prices. And then jot down some notes if something's cheaper so you don't have to remember it. How do you build rhythms? In my work life, which I mentioned, several examples there on the volunteer side, and if you will, the ministry side and the work side that eventually led to burnout. What was the problem? I wasn't building rhythms. I wasn't protecting my sleep. I wasn't protecting a Sabbath of some type of a day off. I'm not saying taking that legalistically, but the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It was made as a gift to us. And this was a very hard thing for me to learn. I don't have to earn rest. It's a gift. It's a gift given from the Lord. Putting in some more coffee breaks in my day, being able to, hey, I'm getting stuck here in creative work, writing or something, get up and take a walk for a few minutes. Go take a 15, maybe even 20-minute walk, pray, regroup, or go accomplish these tasks over here, go switch the laundry, do something, go for a short walk, do something that gets me moving, and then come back. Building rhythms into my life, building habits, and being okay to pause was something very hard for me to learn. But this is the takeaway that I hope from today's thought that you get, because it really hit me like a ton of bricks when I ran across it. But at the same time, it is true. I've seen it tested in real life. And if you think about it, I'm sure you can see ways this applies as well. We're not looking for increased pressure. We're looking to build rhythms. Again, what is so great about a budget or great about shopping with rewards or coupons or because it's a habit, it's a rhythm you get into that doesn't take a lot of your time. It becomes habitual. It becomes a habit that then is much less stressful. It's more stressful in the beginning, but then it becomes part of who you are and part of your rhythm. And I think I've shared before that a productivity expert says that up to 42% of our results and our activity every single day is habit on autopilot, our current habits. So if I have a bad habit of being glued to my phone and responding to everybody right away when they reach out to me, that can be applauded as a virtue, but it's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for my anxiety level, for my stress level, for my heart rate. I could point to a whole lot of things. It's not healthy for my mental state of like being able to focus and do quality work if I'm being distracted all the time. I'd be much better off having a block of time where I'm undistractedly responding to all these things in rapid successive fashion and then take a brief break before engaging in something else. That's more productive. It's a rhythm. So in my life, here's how I've begun to apply this, over the last few years, and especially the last, 7-8 months in the coaching space, especially. Rather than looking at how to add more pressure to my life, I'm looking for how to add more rhythm. So for example, in the past, I used to read my Bible very intensively. Like I read multiple, sometimes even 10 chapters a day. Now, before you think that makes me sound really good, I was single, I had more time. It was a little different in that era, and I'm thankful for it. But my Bible reading could sometimes become a chore that I had to get through or that I forced myself to find the time to do rather than really getting as much out of it. And then I remember going through probably about 4 years ago or so now, maybe 5, probably closer to 4 years ago, I came across a Bible study process. A lady was teaching it. I was looking for a resource for our ladies group when I was pastoring to give to them to be able to enhance their Bible study and help them get into the Word. And I ran across a very well-known lady in the Bible teaching space, and she had a great point as I went through her materials, which was she had kind of left the idea of reading her Bible every single day in a Bible reading plan, and instead she was focusing on studying more deeply. Now here's where I'll explain where I'm going with this in a minute. So she would spend 1 or 2 days a week where she studied really deeply, and she might spend an hour or more, really studying the passage and highlighting things and jotting notes and all this stuff. And then she would take the rest of the week and she would be thinking through it. She might just be praying about one point, or she might chew on something. And so she was chewing on the word as other things in life were happening. And then she also would try to take a day off, or even a couple days, like take the weekend off so that she can enjoy time to rest and enjoy time really to be able to focus on her time in church and really spiritually be being fed by the word. She hadn't come having read a bunch of devotions before that were already on her mind and to some degree distracting her from the message. And I just found that very helpful, because I've read a lot of Bible reading plans in my life. I've done a lot of those things. There's tons of plans out there. There's read through the Bible in a year, in 90 days, in 6 months, and all these different things, or read through certain books of the Bible. But if I really want to digest better and really study more, because 2 Timothy 2:15, I believe it is, says, study to show yourself approved, rightly dividing the word of truth. If I really want to study more, it's going to be more effective to do that in a wiser rhythm, because much study, Ecclesiastes says, wearies the body. And it does. It wearies your mind. And I know what it's like to be physically depleted from working hard in manual labor and physical work. I've done a lot of that in my life. And I also know what it's like to be depleted mentally. I also know what it's like to be depleted emotionally because of working, caring for people. All of these things are work, but they deplete us as a human being in different ways. And if you're depleting yourself in all 3 or 4 of those realms as a human being, like you're emotionally expended, you're mentally expended, you're physically expended, and you're also spiritually expended all at once. I've been there. That led to, the burnout process of really having to rebuild rhythms in all the areas of life. But intensity and pressure did not get me the real results. So, for example, how I'm applying that now in my life is I'm working on the Gen 1 to Rev 22 project. Some of you know what that is. I want to study the Bible more, and one of the motivations is I'm doing that with other people. I'm doing that in a way where there are other folks that are engaging it, other folks that are benefiting from the study, and that helps keep me motivated. And so it does come out, but it comes out on a more reasonable scale. It comes out 5 days a week. And then there's another group I'm part of that is like once a week. And those are commitments that are much more doable. But for my own study, while I have resources to draw on from the past so I can repurpose and reuse and not have to redo everything, sometimes I got to do a little bit of, typing it up or something because I have a handwritten note, but I have that. The other thing is I'm focused this year on trying to study the Bible like 2 or 3 days a week, in a divided, special, focused time. So it might be 30 minutes, it might be an hour, but I want to study, I want to jot my notes. And, in that amount of time, 2 or 3 times a week, I probably get 5 or 6 outlines done, which also fuels what I'm sharing with others. But I'm studying as opposed to just a lot of reading, but not really getting it deeper into me. And that's about building a rhythm. And so when I wrote down my goal is to engage those things, engage that study 2 to 3 times a week. I want to have that as part of my life. And when it's getting the material out there for others, I want to sit down only once or twice a week to schedule out the posts going out of the blogs, of sharing the materials with others. I want to do that in a way that is not intensive every single day, not the pressure of that, because I started off this year doing that. Rather, I want to focus on, I'm keeping the same outcome, the same output, but I'm doing it in a way that's wiser and more effective, and it is more sustainable. And so think about that with your budget and such. I know many times when financial pressures come, or maybe it's another area of life, your time management, and I'll share an example of this, and then I'll let you go. I know I'm giving a lot of personal examples today, but there's some ways I think that can really help in providing some coaching examples to you here. But one thing that happens a lot in financial situations is people feel the pressure of retirement is looming closer, not sure I do that, or debt is really high and it's a lot of pressure, and wanting to get free from that stress, or figuring out how to manage income. It's usually some intensive reason, maybe even a health situation, that is then bringing to bear how do we manage our financial resources better. And it results in intensity of trying to solve a problem. But what really produces lasting, sustainable change and long-term impact is building rhythms. So, like I've mentioned much earlier before in the video, getting out of debt is something you can become intensive about. You can take on extra work, you can work overtime, you can sell stuff, you can be attacking it aggressively with a plan. But then, all things being equal, you're going to be digging yourself out of that. How are you going to switch gears when, okay, there's not that pressure anymore? Are you putting the same intensity toward like massively saving for retirement and hoarding then because you've paid off things? How are you going to look at it? Or are you able to like automate what's going into your retirement contributions and be able to automate, maybe some savings over here, and then able to be more strategic? If you still need to work extra hours or still want to work a few extra hours, can you do that in something that is more life-giving and more of an interest and more of a benefit? Or is it just to make money? You see how it changes when the intensity and the pressure reduces to where we can begin to be more strategic on building things that are rhythms and that are going to benefit. Another example I'll share is I've been looking into some different things for part-time work to supplement, because in coaching, here's kind of what it's like. When you're coaching for your business, if that's the only thing you're doing, you're basically looking for another client. You're chasing down, for lack of a better term, clients, and then onboarding those clients, and you're always prospecting and looking for clients. To reduce some of that pressure of having to look for as many clients and to maximize my strengths, which are in the teaching realm, that's more natural, enjoyable, it's where my rhythm more is, then I've adapted some things. I've talked several times in videos about how I adopted some micro habits of contacting at least 5 people a day and having some meaningful interaction and conversations, as opposed to like calling 50 people a day with annoying sales calls. I used a different model. The typical business model out there is call 50 people annoyingly or somehow contact them, or use technology to use an automated process to automate that for you, automate a follow-up process. And so I maximized using some automations. I maximized getting in the habit of contacting people, and then now I have a pretty consistent flow in many respects of way more than 5 people reaching out to me. But it still is a very challenging business model when you're constantly looking for the next client or the next consulting or the next speaking engagement. All of those ways are very hard ways to make a living. They're possible. But since my strength is in the area of teaching and instruction and training, I'm leaning more into that. So I do videos like this. I benefit a group of people through the coaching group here, or if I use content in another way, I'm able to use that when I'm producing other written content and such that can then become compiled or adapted to be into other resources or books or training materials or work guides, which can then help other people. With a lot of requests coming my way, one thing I've talked about in the group is I've had to get smarter on how to manage, because I can't help everybody that reaches out. If it's a very similar thing, I can be much more effective rather than individual one-on-one service to every single person. I can be much more effective if I have a resource I can give them. So if it's a lot of common questions I'm getting, or if it's a lot of certain type of workshop request or something, okay, do I have a material that I can begin to give them to let them know what this is going to be like if I present it? Can I have some type of recording or some product I could even offer if they need something now but my schedule is full? Something they can plug in and play, so to speak, or an outline or something that they can use. Do I have a resource that can serve more people? It's not about pushing people off. It's about being wiser with the use of your time and building rhythms so that I don't get caught up in all the intensity. It happens sometimes, but where that doesn't become my rhythm, my rhythms of continuing to serve become the rhythm. So the illustration I said is, with all of that, looking for some other part-time things, I've looked into a couple of teaching opportunities that are very part-time, but the really neat thing is they're things that are going to allow me to almost serve on autopilot. I'll still be in this vein of coaching, assisting people, helping people, training, but I'll be able to be doing it without having to see clients for that portion of my time. So then the challenge is rather simple. It's whenever you take on part-time work or something, sometimes companies or services or individuals, however you have it set up, they might want to give you a ton. So a couple things have been very helpful. Finding an opportunity or opportunities that allow flexibility for me to work with them and give them my schedule, and then they're going to use me according to my availability. So I can build my rhythm and keep my rhythm to my work and to my other things in life, my other commitments, to where my part-time job doesn't become a stressful additional thing. Now, there always can be, moments where it's like that, but wanting to intentionally go into where this is a relationship where I'm providing services part-time, I'm not having to find the clients for this, but it is at an income level and it's at a agreement level of how that, employment contract relationship works to where I'm able to do it. Another way that I've done that is with like surveys and such, providing analytical research and feedback, but being able to do that in a way that sometimes there's a contracted time tied to that, but other times there's a service and I'm, a preferred member or whatever, for lack of a better term, but I can engage it according to my rhythm and my schedule, where I'm not mastered by these things. So I've shared a lot of examples today, but the point of what I hope that you've taken away in today's time of this teaching segment is this. In your life, the way to be more effective and more sustainable is to build rhythms. I've talked about micro habits a lot. If you've never heard me talk about that, go over to my YouTube because the videos have probably expired here where they first have appeared in the group. Go over to YouTube and you can find some of that past content. Type in micro habits on my YouTube page and you'll see that I have taught on that and how to apply that. But by applying those habits and building rhythms, that's the way to be high capacity. Let me say it this way. Anyone that is super successful in their time management, their financial management, their volunteer work, their career, if they're successful in those things, it didn't happen by chance. You might get famous in a moment, but you're not sustainable that way. If you're successful, you're doing this for the long haul and with effectiveness. You have built habits and you have learned to lean into rhythms. I can't tell you how many successful people I've met, whether they're in the public, private, nonprofit sector, that they have rhythms to how they engage. They have rhythms to how they help people. They have parameters, if you will, and things have to fit within those rhythms. If they don't operate that way, I've never seen them be successful. If I know someone that's in any of those spaces, public, private, or nonprofit sector, that are living at the mercy and the tyranny of the urgent and what everybody else wants from them, they're never successful. If they are, they have learned to have parameters, they've learned the kind way to say no, and they've learned how to be discerning on and being careful with what they say yes to. Not meaning that they're arrogant or don't care about people, but that they're just applying the types of illustrations I've shared with you. Again, in my life, when I was taking every opportunity coming my way, it really wasn't good for me. It wasn't good emotionally. It wasn't good spiritually. It wasn't good financially. It wasn't good in any of those. For my physical health, none of that, because I was just focused on taking on as much as I could. That's not what leads to success. Wisdom. It's not just chopping down more trees. It's having the wisdom to know if I sit here for a half hour and sharpen my axe, that I'm going to be able to cut more trees down, and I'll be able to do it with less effort because the blade is sharp. God bless.